3 people left a bar together on a freezing January night. Only 2 made it to the parking lot. The third person vanished somewhere along a quarter-mile stretch of road and has never been seen again. Tonight, we're investigating the baffling disappearance of Jonathan Schaff, a case where every lead went cold, every theory fell apart, and the truth remains buried somewhere between New York and Vermont. January 18th, 2014. Granville, New York. A small town nestled right on the border with Vermont. On this particular Saturday night, the temperature was plummeting to 21 degrees Fahrenheit, but inside the Riverside Pub on Main Street, it was warm, crowded, and lively. The Riverside was a popular spot, especially for people crossing over from Vermont. Why? Last call in Vermont was 2 a.m., but in New York, the party could go until 4 in the morning. For those wanting to extend their night out, the Riverside Pub was the place to be. Among the patrons that night was 23-year-old Jonathan Schaff. Jonathan lived in Fairhaven, Vermont, and worked at Walmart. He was out enjoying himself, socializing with friends, and spending time with his father, John Schaff, who was also at the bar. Around 3 a.m., John decided to head home to Cambridge, New York. He said goodbye to his son and told him to call if he needed anything. Jonathan, who was having a great time, decided to stay. That simple goodbye would haunt John Schaff for years to come, because it was the last time he would ever see his son. Not long after Jonathan's father left, something happened that would later become a key part of the investigation, though not in the way you might think. A disagreement broke out between Jonathan and another man at the bar. We don't know exactly what started it, but it escalated into a fistfight. Other patrons quickly broke it up. During the scuffle, Jonathan's glasses were broken, and he sustained a couple of cuts on his face from the shattered lenses. But witnesses said he appeared fine otherwise. No serious injuries. Here's what's important. The police would later describe this fight as nothing more than a misunderstanding between 2 intoxicated individuals. Neither man left the bar immediately. There were no hard feelings. The bar settled back down, and Jonathan stayed until last call. At approximately 4:30 a.m., Jonathan left the Riverside Pub. He wasn't alone. He walked out with a 33-year-old woman and a 26-year-old man, both from the Fairhaven area. Jonathan had just met them that evening. They had offered to give him a ride home. Their car was parked in the Loomis Trucking Company parking lot, just across the Vermont state line. It was a short walk down Route 149, maybe a quarter mile, 5 minutes on foot, if that. But somewhere between the bar and that parking lot, Jonathan Schaff disappeared. Jonathan lived with his mother, May Winchell. When he didn't come home that night, she started to worry. When he didn't show up for his scheduled shift at Walmart that afternoon, she knew something was wrong. She reported him missing. Police immediately began interviewing everyone who had been at the Riverside Pub the night before. They learned about the bar fight, but after speaking with witnesses and the man involved, they didn't believe it was connected to Jonathan's disappearance. Both parties had stayed at the bar with no further conflict. Investigators then spoke with the 2 people who had left the bar with Jonathan, the couple who had offered him a ride. They told police something puzzling. They had stopped briefly to light their cigarettes. Jonathan kept walking ahead. By the time they reached the parking lot, he wasn't there. The couple was questioned extensively. Police said there was no reason to believe they had anything to do with Jonathan's disappearance. But the question remained, what happened to Jonathan on that short walk? Chief Bassett of the Granville Police was immediately concerned about one thing in particular: the Mettawee River. The river ran dangerously close to the Loomis trucking property. Some of the trailers were parked within 40 feet of the water. There was a steep 10-foot embankment that dropped down to the river at the back of the parking lot. If Jonathan had gotten too close in the dark, if he was intoxicated and disoriented, he could have fallen in. And in that freezing water, he may not have been able to get back out. The search for Jonathan Schaff began immediately, and it was a massive effort involving multiple agencies. Vermont State Police, New York State Police, and Granville Police all worked together. Because Jonathan was believed to have crossed into Vermont before disappearing, a command post was set up in the town of Wells, just minutes from Granville. But almost from the start, the search was plagued by brutal weather conditions. Between the time Jonathan was last seen and the time he was reported missing, the area had gotten several inches of snow. Another 5 inches were expected. While police dogs could still track in the snow, it made things much harder for human investigators. Footprints, items, evidence could all be buried beneath the fresh powder. Jonathan's cell phone records became crucial. They indicated that he had been somewhere near Sheldon's Concrete or the Newmont Slate Company, both located on Route 149 in Paulet, Vermont, shortly after leaving the bar. But with no idea which direction he went from there, police couldn't narrow down the search area. Then, on Tuesday, 4 days after Jonathan disappeared, they got their first piece of physical evidence. Jonathan's cell phone was found in the cab of an abandoned truck in the Loomis trucking parking lot. The truck hadn't been moved in a while. There were numerous unused trailers and vehicles on the property. Investigators couldn't be certain if Jonathan had left his phone there himself, or if someone else had placed it there. But the discovery confirmed one thing: Jonathan had made it to Vermont. That meant Vermont State Police would take the lead on the investigation. On that same Tuesday, the weather finally cleared enough for helicopters to take to the air. An Army National Guard helicopter conducted aerial searches of the roads, fields, and rivers in the area. They found nothing. The focus intensified on the Mettawee River. If Jonathan's phone was found so close to the water, and if he had been intoxicated and walking in the dark, it seemed possible, even probable, that he had ended up in the river. But there was a problem. The river was running unusually fast that week, making it even more dangerous. The Vermont State Police brought in their dive team, but they could only conduct a limited search. The water was too cold, too fast, too treacherous. Meanwhile, the land search expanded. Teams covered 5 to 6 miles in every direction from the parking lot, checking every possible route Jonathan could have taken. Police asked local residents to walk their properties and check sheds, outbuildings, and vehicles, anywhere Jonathan might have sought shelter from the cold. No one found anything. And then there was the temperature. Overnight, it was dropping below 0 degrees Fahrenheit. Captain Patch, one of the lead investigators, made a grim observation. They had no conclusive evidence showing that Jonathan wasn't alive. What he didn't say, but everyone understood, was that no one could survive long in those conditions. A week after Jonathan vanished, investigators were no closer to finding him. Apart from his cell phone, they had found absolutely nothing. No clothing, no footprints, no witnesses, no leads. Many of the officers involved believed Jonathan had ended up in the Mettawee River. It was the theory that made the most sense, but the weather made it impossible to prove or disprove. On January 30th, nearly 2 weeks after Jonathan's disappearance, the Vermont State Police scuba team and police dog teams conducted an extensive search of the river and its banks. The divers still couldn't enter the water due to the extreme cold, but they used an underwater camera to scan the river bottom. They focused on the stretch of river near Loomis Trucking. They found nothing. It wasn't until February the 28th that dive teams were finally able to fully enter the water. Representatives from agencies in both New York and Vermont coordinated the effort. They concentrated on the area of the river adjacent to the parking lot where Jonathan's phone had been found. Search dogs had been brought through this area multiple times, and each time they showed interest in a specific spot. Police brought in a backhoe to break through the ice on the river. They found logs, debris, natural river material, but nothing related to Jonathan. The investigation stalled. Winter turned to spring. Then on May 6th, nearly 4 months after Jonathan disappeared, conditions were finally ideal for a massive search. Water levels had dropped as the spring runoff eased. The trees and vegetation hadn't bloomed yet, making visibility better. Around 60 people from various agencies participated. Leading the effort was Detective Sergeant Matt Dennis and his cadaver dog, Otto, a Courtaulds Griffon and one of only 2 cadaver dogs in the entire state of Vermont. Dennis floated down the river in a raft with Otto, waiting for the dog to alert to any sign of human remains. When Otto alerted, divers would know where to search. About a dozen of Jonathan's friends and family members gathered to watch the search. They waited. They hoped. Otto alerted near a tree with a large root ball in the river, located directly behind Loomis Trucking, very close to where Jonathan's cell phone had been found. Police brought in an excavator to move the massive tree. They lifted and rolled it out of the way. Divers combed through the root ball and the surrounding area. They found nothing. Months passed, then a year. January 2015 marked 1 year since Jonathan was reported missing. For Jonathan's mother, May Winchell, the pain was unbearable. She told a reporter that she had started picking up every heads-up penny she found, something Jonathan had always done. Whenever she found one, she hoped it would bring her good luck and bring her son home. In April 2016, more than 2 years after Jonathan disappeared, Vermont State Police Detective Sergeant Todd Wilkins was assigned to the case. As he familiarized himself with the investigation, he noticed something. A quarry close to where Jonathan was last seen had never been searched. The police had conducted an exhaustive investigation of the river in 2014, but a quarry off Route 149 had been overlooked. Why? It was believed to have been frozen solid at the time of Jonathan's disappearance. But Wilkins wasn't so sure. On June 6th, divers from both Vermont and New York State Police searched the quarry, which was owned by Sheldon Excavation Company. Nearly a dozen divers spent around 5 hours underwater. They found nothing. A year later, in July 2017, Vermont State Police conducted a search of a second quarry. This one located off York Street Extension in the neighboring town of Poultney. It was not an easy search. The quarry only covered a couple of acres, but the water was 50 to 60 feet deep. Visibility was near zero due to cloudy water. Loose rocks and debris made it impossible to use sonar equipment. Investigators did their best. Again, they found nothing. By this point, it had been more than 3 years since Jonathan Schaff walked down Route 149 and vanished. And from the very beginning, the case had been plagued by rumors. One early rumor claimed that Jonathan had never left the bar alive, that he'd been killed and buried under a new concrete floor in the bar's basement. This was quickly debunked. No such floor existed. Others insisted the bar fight was to blame. Police interviewed the man involved extensively but ruled him out completely. He had nothing to do with Jonathan's disappearance. When Jonathan's phone was found at Loomis Trucking, whispers spread that an employee there was responsible. Detectives interviewed everyone who worked at the company. None were ever considered suspects. For years, police believed the most likely explanation was that Jonathan had fallen into the river and drowned. But as the years passed, that theory fell apart. Water levels in the Mettawee River have reached historic lows multiple times since 2014. If Jonathan's body had been in that river, it would have been found by now. So where does that leave us today, more than a decade after Jonathan Schaff disappeared? Police have narrowed it down to 2 possible theories. Either Jonathan was the victim of foul play, or he voluntarily walked away from his family, friends, and life. No one who knew Jonathan believes he would have vanished on his own. Even the police seem to think that's a long shot. Jonathan was close with his family. He had a job, a home, a community. There was no indication he wanted to leave his life behind. That leaves foul play as the most likely explanation. But if that's what happened, who was responsible? And how did they manage to leave absolutely no evidence behind? The 2 people who left the bar with Jonathan were questioned extensively. Police have said repeatedly that there's no reason to suspect them. The man involved in the bar fight was cleared. Employees at Loomis Trucking were cleared. So who does that leave? One possibility is that Jonathan encountered someone we don't know about. Someone who wasn't at the bar. Someone who happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. Maybe Jonathan accepted a ride from a stranger. Maybe someone saw an intoxicated man walking alone in the dark and saw an opportunity. But if that's what happened, where is Jonathan's body? This is a rural area, yes, but it's not vast wilderness. Extensive searches covered miles in every direction. Quarries were searched. The river was searched over and over. How could someone hide a body so well that years later it still hasn't been found? There's another troubling possibility, one that's harder to accept but can't be ruled out. What if Jonathan's disappearance was planned? What if someone he knew or someone he had just met had darker intentions? The couple who offered him a ride said they stopped to light cigarettes and lost track of him. But what if that's not the whole story? What if something happened during that walk that hasn't been disclosed? I want to be very clear, there is no evidence pointing to those individuals. Police have said they're not suspects. But in cases like this, investigators sometimes have theories they can't prove. They might suspect something, but lack the evidence to move forward. Or maybe the truth is something none of us have considered. Maybe Jonathan did make it to that parking lot. Maybe he got into a different vehicle. Maybe he wandered off into the woods and succumbed to the cold in a place searchers simply didn't look. What we know for certain is this. Jonathan Schaff was 23 years old. He had his whole life ahead of him. On a cold January night in 2014, he left a bar with two people he had just met. Somewhere along a quarter-mile stretch of road, he disappeared. No body has ever been found. No one has been charged. And more than 10 years later, his family is still searching for answers. Jonathan's mother, May, still picks up those pennies. She still hopes that one day her son will come home. Jonathan Schaff was last seen on January 18th, 2014. He was 23 years old, 6 feet tall, weighed 170 pounds, and had brown hair and blue eyes. He wore glasses, though they were broken at the time of his disappearance. When last seen, Jonathan was wearing a light blue or grey hooded sweatshirt, a dark brown or black Carhartt jacket, dark blue jeans, and brown work boots. If you have any information about Jonathan Schaff's disappearance, please contact the Vermont State Police at 802-773-9101 or the Granville Police Department at 51864-21414. Every case we cover on this channel represents a real person, a real family, and real grief that persists year after year. If you found this video informative and want to help keep Jonathan's case in the public eye, please consider sharing it. And if you're interested in more deep dives into unsolved mysteries and true crime cases, don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell. We cover cases like Jonathan's because we believe that awareness can lead to answers, and answers can lead to justice. Thank you for watching. Until next time, stay safe, stay curious, and never stop asking questions.